your talks this morning. It's so many absolutely interesting topics to discuss further and to bring further and to reflect on. Before this conference, I was quite busy, so it was very difficult for me to make a very coherent and conclusive text. So I just want to bring in some ideas and some perspectives that I've been dealing with over the years that could be relevant for what we could be discussing regarding, for example, transhumanism and all these kind of things that we've been discussing so far in the conference. I'm also happy to say that I'm very inspired by, for example, the study by Herman Kahn and Anthony Wiener, in which they developed, as Daniel Bell was head of the Academy of Science and Art at that time, and introduced the concept post-industrialism, for example. Because that, and you say that that concept, which was, had its origin in a future study like the year 2000, speculating 33 years ahead, had a tremendous influence on sociology in the coming decades. And I could mention several other contributions from our field to more conventional professions. So I think that also is a very interesting point of departure to have in mind discussing approaches to future research today. I will also mention, who are so crazy to deal with transcendental philosophy in our time? And what is it? Because we are living in a society that are, appearing very fragmented. That changes are so rapid and things are developing so fast, and it's very difficult to think about what is supposed to be the common ground of these developments. What is a human? What is nature? The question that conventional transcendental philosophy try to answer. And I think it's very important to relaunch that ambition somehow. Not relaunch it, but you have to, try to address those fundamental questions and maybe try it in new ways. And that is one of my motivations dealing with, for example, Immanuel Kant's philosophy. I used to be the manager or head of a relatively comprehensive project for the Norwegian government 10-15 years ago, which called Norway 2030, in which we had a pleasure to, go into a lot of interesting topics, and also had the possibility to reflect very much on methodology issues. And one of the things that, the concept that we developed was future research as construction of the past, in the sense that we tried to develop a kind of time perspectivism, in which you said that the past is considered as different when you are, 30 years in the future, as you consider the past today. So you have to, in a future study, you have to take account that the conception of the past is changing. And that's also the point of departure, trying to reread some of the classical philosophical texts, like the one of, especially in my case, the one of Immanuel Kant, and also considering, could this kind of reading, could this kind of text give us some new perspectives on what's going on today? And Jennifer, you were talking about transhumanism. Several people have been discussing it, converging technologies, the cyberism. You develop new kind of relation between organism and technology. And all these kind of developments, my opinion, are challenging some main consideration, on main expectation that we got, especially considering what we conceive as natural and what we conceive as artificial. We can say that, well, natural is something that is given to us. That is a normal, as original organism, for example. It's a tree in the forest. It's a cow, walking around there, and so on and so forth. And the artificial thing is like Cornelia she's doing research on in vitro meat production, which is absolutely other way, as a no natural way of producing meat than through normal agriculture. And I think all these kind of developments are challenging our general expectation of what is natural and what is artificial. So that's one of the hypotheses that we had trying to reread those texts. And you also mentioned the binary, in the traditional philosophical knowledge theory, you have, the subject that are going to develop some knowledge on the one side, and the object in studies on the other side, the subject-object relation. And a lot of developments within the theory and science the last decades have been trying to overcome this kind of dichotomy. That you say, you have a subject here and your object there, but you're never gonna, still a lot of problems of what is what. And for example, people who have been dealing a lot with Immanuel Kant trying to transform his philosophy into semiotics, for example, and into language. Jürgen Habermas is one of them. I won't elaborate very much on that here, but in the parallel session I'm going to go more into that they try to find a unit between subject and object, in the sense that they want to overcome this kind of conventional dichotomy of knowledge theory. So what I'm going to say later is against this kind of assumption. I mean, we have to re-establish a thorough distinction between human being, the man as such, and what the man as such, or woman as such, are going to find out about the object of their knowledge building. So, and I've also been trying to read those texts and was able to find a kind of interpretation of the whole critique of pure reason of Immanuel Kant that could, in a way, contribute to that kind of thesis. Because, in my opinion, the point of departure of the whole transcendental philosophy, and when I'm talking about transcendental philosophy, a lot of people got some kind of association that you are talking somehow religious association or whatever. And so I think it's a very, a very plain reason for talking about transcendental philosophy in that sense, and that is the common condition for people to understand something that are different from themselves, in the sense that you go and try to learn something and try to do research, you try to understand something of the surroundings. So I can't go in all details here on that, but in my opinion is that the point of departure of transcendental philosophy in the sense of Kant is that is the development within the natural sciences, that you have a natural scientists that are trying to understand the world and developing perspective on the nature which is absolutely different from himself or herself. That through this creation of natural imagination about the nature or technology or whatever, you are also creating the possibility to reflect on yourself as a human being. So the one is a condition of the other. So if you somehow try to break this distinction, this binary down, you are ruining it, because then you are not able to reflect very well on yourself either. So it's maybe a difficult point to grasp, but that's one of the things that we were trying to discuss and trying to find out reading those classical texts. And the consequences of that is that you have to rethink the relation between technology development and yourself and the human being as something, as man. And for example, Jürgen Habermas had this distinction between instrumentality on one side and communication reason on the other side. And I think a consequence of what I'm trying to say here is that that kind of distinction doesn't make sense, because it's not that technological instrumental way of thinking is going to colonize the communicative orientation and dialogue orientation between people, but they are pre-considering each other in a sense. So that also means that you have to think about technology and the intervene or the development of new kind of organism, for example, new kind of technology that are influencing our body, just to mention, in a new way. And it's not, and you are not able to, keep the absolute distinction between something that is natural, that in the beginning, as different from something that is artificial. The main thing that is both something that's different from what you are yourself. So in that sense, the consequences of that would be that you have to find ways to promote and stimulate these kind of developments, because it just started, in my opinion. Transhumanism, the cuborism, and so on. That's going to be the daily life of the future. So we have to think that how are we supposed to critically support these kind of developments and not fight against it. That's one of the consequences of what I'm trying to think. But this is somehow a very tricky thing to go into, but I think it's also very interesting, because it shows us a possibility to use traditional classical philosophical text to try to understand these contemporary developments. I also, in that sense, wanted to respond on. We are living also in the post age. You have post-industrialism, you have post-Fordism, you have post-modernism, and so on and so forth. And in my opinion, this is also a result of some poor imagination abilities, because you are not able to grasp the new development, because everything is post something. Why don't try to think of something new, something, a positive concept in one way or another? And in that respect, I'm trying to play with a concept that I call universal perspectivism. In a sense that perspectivism is, come from Nietzsche, that says that, you can't see the world without some glasses, as a kind of phenomenological approach to the world. And that's very important. And you have to take account of the insights within the postmodernity development, all these post-movements, so to say. But when that is said, you also need a kind of new orientation, because human beings also have a wish and a need to have an absolute anchoring of the existence somehow. And how is that need supposed to be met? And without falling into some absolute categorical mental dictatorship, so to say. So how to keep the openness, and still try to find out some absolute orientation points for human mankind. I think that's also another challenge to deal with. And in my suggestion for an answer in this is to, develop a concept of nature, which is something absolutely different to what we are as human beings. Although, our body is considered to be, conventional organism and, completed or in addition to conventional other new technology and so forth. But if you have a concept of nature which is a synergy between what we normally call original harmonic nature and artificial nature, and take that together. And that's the opposite of our orientation point. And our self-reflection has to be somehow developed through our knowledge building of that object, which is an absolute distinction to ourselves, namely artificial and original nature. I think that's. I'm going to elaborate a bit more on this on the session afterwards. But just to to bring some ideas into the round. Just to finish up, some of the consequences on the policy level that could be. I mean, these are not thoughts that are finished. I mean, it's just bring it in, and we can. Some, if you are interested, we can discuss it further. But some of the consequences of this, in my opinion, would be that God is not only dead; he might never have existed. Nature, including the original quasi-harmonic nature, is constructed and social, cultural. Nature is at the same time constructed and reproduced as something absolutely different from what we are ourselves. Man creates himself through the construction of human beings as a human being, namely through the construction of imagination about nature, imagination about technology and other objects in our surrounding. Pluralism, fragmentation, individualism assumes a common human project to be a good project. Future pessimism is a resignation. And also could challenge our conventional term of sustainability. But I won't go further into that, but it could be. And universal perspectivism is an expression of what the individual call an enlightened confusion or confused enlightenment. And with that I would just conclude that the civilization has just begun. Thank you.
Any questions about confused enlightenment?
Can I ask? Just for clarification, is your kind of basic position on transcendental philosophy coming from Kant?
Yeah, I'm very inspired by those texts. Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So it has a sort of metaphysical aspect that knowledge is always being. Right. This is.
Yeah, but I have to add, because it's a kind of interpretation that we developed of his philosophy, in the sense that as a transcendental philosopher, he took as point of departure a practice that were going on in the society, and that was, natural scientific activities. And these natural scientific activities have a progress, develop new knowledge all the time about something that is absolutely different to ourselves, about the nature. So imagination about natural connection, natural relation. Yeah.
So you have a sort of dualist thesis that nature and humans are different.
Yeah, but I try to say that it's the most important thing is the main question that Kant asks is, not how to unite those things, but how is this absolute distinction possible in general? Because it's necessary to formulate the hypothesis about the connection in nature. You have to have an imagination about the nature that is absolutely different from yourself. That's a precondition for natural scientific activity. That's right.
It's, I think it's not only Kant, but also the 17th century philosophy by Descartes, and all the mechanical idea that the world itself is a sort of big mechanic, and that we are part of the world, so we are mechanics. And I think the project, to go back to your talk, the project was probably conceived in the post-war DARPA. Maybe it's the idea of Vannevar Bush, that you know the text as we may think, that gave the starting movement for implementing an enormous machine that might substitute to human will and integrated in human brains, because human brains was assimilated to a mechanic. And the question that we have since is, obviously we're not mechanic, but what are we? And where is nature? And what do we have the lessons to get from nature? And nature is completely absent of, I would say, Silicon Valley way of thinking, which is a dominant way of thinking, to control the world. Control for what?
But Erik, if you see a question about, when you say, what are we? The subject of your investigation is yourself. But if you say, what kind of conditions do you have, how does it function with natural law or some natural correlation and thing? That's something, then you ask about something absolutely different. But they, it's a condition of each other. Because now we are, if you see this development with the cubism, are challenging our conventional perspective on what we are. The technology development are challenging our self-conception in absolutely way now. So we have, but when we are discussing who are we are talking about ourselves, and we have to reinvent ourselves due to this development.
Well, maybe
Johan,
a small. Well, we are artistic bodies, and the flowers are also artistic bodies, and the birds are also artistic bodies, and all the living creatures are. So we are part of that, and this is completely absent because it's taught reversely. We are dominating. We are not dominating. We're part of.
Johan?
Just a second. Well, I want to say something a little bit general. 3 brilliant talks, absolutely brilliant, from presidents of WFSF in the sense of Western Future Studies Federation. If you keep the W, tell that it stands for Western instead of World. So you don't have to change any initials. A Buddhist would have said, much too much about individuals, not about relations between them. A Hindu would have said, much too much future, not the unity of past, present and future. A Japanese would have said, excellent, interesting, how do you combine all of this? Putting it together eclectically, and with everything else in the world. A Chinese would have said, You talk as if you have a future as a final state. The future will be as filled with contradictions as the present you have today. The question is not how to arrive at the future. The question is how to handle contradictions. I just mention it as a little taste. Just as a little tiny taste. So if we could try to move WFSF from Western Future Studies Federation to World Future Studies Federation, it would be interesting. Thank you.
I agree.
Well, following your line, Johan, here, I'm trying to suggest another route for philosophy, which is Arabic and Islamic philosophy. It says that in one of its traditions, it says that you should accept an ittihad, which means a union between knower and the known. And I think that a union between knower and the known is almost also compatible with what is happening right now in terms of the co-creative and evolution of humans and technology. What is your view about a potential union between knower and known, given that you are so much interested in the continental philosophy or Western philosophy? How do you see the relationship between Islamic and Western traditions?
That's a very appropriate and interesting question, of course. And I think that if you talk about the unit, about the person who try to know something, understand something, and go bit of study. Then I think that this kind of unit is going to dynamism, that are going to, movement back and forward between self-reflection, because you have to reinvent yourself all the time, and when you reinvent what you're trying to find out about. And in my opinion, I think this also could be something that could be principle across Hinduism, across Buddhism and Islam, and all these kind of cultural hegemonic systems. So I don't see that, as only a Western thing. I think that's only a basic thing that could be, common to all. Linda?
I love the discussion. I'm working on my own book called Options for Future Human Evolution, and I'm looking at 11 new technologies. If anyone's interested, I have an updated paper on that. But I think where we had the agricultural industrial information age, and now these new technologies are raising enormous questions for our future. And I want to also applaud Jennifer for raising all the consciousness part of it, because one of the theses of my book is that we have to have a dialogue. We have the technology people here, then we have the environmentalists here, and we have the consciousness people here, and we have everyone in their own little cubby holes, but we've got to desperately start a bigger dialogue between these different perspectives on our human future. And a couple little interesting things in terms of immortality, transhumanists. When you get under the surface, what is motivating the transhumanists is they actually want immortality. They don't want to die. But because they have a physical worldview only, they have to find it through physical means only, which is a very interesting insight. And then another thing I think that's being raised by all this, like virtual reality, big question, what is reality? And then if you have an experience of it, and then genetic engineering, we're going to be able to have designer babies. Is this a good thing? Enormous, huge questions for our human future. And then another thing I think is a big issue is whether humanity is going to be diverging in different directions going forward, or whether we're going to stay on one path. Because there are some people may go this way, other people this way, other people this way, and there's also going to space. You go to space, you have a whole new environment you have to adapt to, and biologically we're not originally meant to be living in space. So, there's just enormous questions. And another big issue coming on the horizon, are we going to discover life in the universe? And we have to talk about cultural diversity and dealing with cultures. What about when we start negotiating with different species beyond humans? Well, we want to negotiate.
Or they consider themselves creatures of ourselves. Jean Erik?
I found those three speeches fascinating. Really, I learned a lot in a few minutes. My question is, if at the end of the day, our future is driven by the GAFA, which is more or less what we feel, with this technology token, as well as this amount of money which is thrown on that. And then there is this resistance with more human-centered future. But nevertheless, at the end of the day, is what do we do with those people who are mostly oriented for making profit, maximum of power out of consuming and producing the new technology and so on. So it's the position of individuals vis-à-vis the money, vis-à-vis wealth, vis-à-vis all form of, let's say, economic growth ideology, which will matter, whatever the culture they are. Certainly they are not going to take the same position in advanced economic country as they are in the poorest country, vis-à-vis this issue of money and wealth and accumulation and inequality and so on. But my question is whether at the end of the day it's an ethical attitude vis-à-vis consuming, producing, accumulating all form of money and wealth and capitalism. We are far away from, I would say, abstract things like transcendental, subject-object, but more basic things about survival. Survival.
Ethical reflection is self-reflection. So I agree. So, and you have to improve that. You have to stimulate that very much. Yes. Yeah.
So I guess we're opening up to the whole discussion now. So
We have time to ask questions from Richard and Jennifer and Erik.
Yes, I actually have the opening the whole discussion. I have a little remark to all three of you. Starting, I would like to hook on to what Thierry said about Silicon Valley ruling and ruling the world for what. And also the technocratic futures, which we are worried about. And my point is, when I'm looking at the bigger picture, ruling is obviously a feature of the dominator model when we're looking at Rian Eisler. And with technology, who is creating the technology? Who is driving this move towards techno-futures? It's pretty obvious, although I did not see any statistics about female inventors and male inventors, but I assume that it's male-driven. So the solution really is like, we don't want this to go too far. How do you stop it? Under the current paradigm, you can't stop it because it's male-dominated, and as many other areas, there should be a change of guard, so to speak, and then things would naturally fall into a different pattern. It's a different paradigm we're talking about. And also was the internet, like we're talking about the internet as something else outside, and then you have real world and you have the artificial world. But really the internet is just a reflection of the real world. You find in the internet everything to the same extent as you find it in the real world. So when we invented the internet, the optimistic idea was like, oh, this is democratic and it shouldn't be controlled at all. So we have seen where that thinking have brought us at present, and we're realizing that, because we have to control society because we have criminals, we have to control the internet because there are criminals there as well. So it's like big questions, but very simple solutions when you look at it as a big picture situation. And also the division between like, is man part of nature or not? for women it was always obvious we are part of nature, they feel it through their bodies. And it's again a male-dominated idea that we something bigger and something separate, and we have to conquer nature, because it's again about conquering and ruling. So I'm sort of taking it to a gender agenda here, just a different dimension.
Can I respond to that one? There was an interesting, there's quite a lot of women's futures groups starting up around the world, just quite recently. I'd say in the last year or so I've been aware of it. A lot of activity on Twitter, for instance. There was an article that was published, I think in, I think it was New York Times, that was about what 20 top scientists think about AI, and had pictures of them all, and of course all 20 were men.
Yes,
So it kind of went viral among the women's futures groups on Twitter. We've had some comments on that, haven't we, Dana? So I think there's an emergence of interest. To me the issue is that there are a lot of women scientists involved in AI and IT and all those things, but for some reason they're not getting the media coverage, they're not getting known about the big names of the males. But it's fantastic to see so many young women futurists here, and there's a great emergence, I think, of women starting to take a more active role in this area. So yeah.
Can I ask a question from Richard? Richard, I was very interested in what you were picturing as the internet oligarch, or so to speak, what you call them, crypto anarchists. Crypto anarchists. You must have heard about the arrival of blockchain revolution. So this blockchain revolution tells that we are going to actually remove any kind of central authority, no matter a central bank or a central recording or anything else. And it promises to be a much better and more open and less appropriate place for dictators or oligarchs to control everything.
Although blockchain is currently used mainly by criminals.
Exactly. Yeah.
but this is the downside. But there are some people who look at the upside of it. I was wondering what is your critical assessment of the future of blockchain?
Well, I can't pretend I'm an expert on cryptocurrencies. It's a whole universe in its own right, even more abstract. But it's very similar to other innovations in that you have small groups of dedicated people who are saying, hey, this is the next big thing, it's wonderful, it does all this good stuff. And other people who are perhaps not quite so convinced. One of my concerns about blockchain is while it is secure, it can't be controlled, all the transactions are recorded, and yes, it could replace a lot of the activities of banks. It is also very, very, very complex. And there is a real question. One of the topics we haven't talked about at all, because you can't do everything in a conference, is something we discussed in detail at Toronto, the last World Future Society conference that we went to. And there was a whole big session on the global collapse scenarios. And that's been really out of our view entirely during this time. But if you look at those seriously, there are powerful reasons for expecting discontinuities as we move into the future. These systems that we live by and that we depend on are all based on certain Earth functions working successfully, or at least adequately for human beings. And most people are aware of the climate issue, but there are many others of that kind coming together in a tremendous collision of growth against the planet. In fact, one of the best books came out recently was Collision Course, global, something about the, what was the subtitle? So this lady had actually studied the limits to growth and then updated it, basically. So infinite growth on a finite planet. So if you take that view, there's a serious question about whether sophisticated computer networks are going to be able to run seamlessly in a world characterized by certain
unpredictable reoccurrence of discontinuities. It's fine in a safe technocratic world where everything hums along, is under control. I think we all know that's a fantasy. The other thing that came out of Rushkoff for me, because he was talking about that, was that he said that he felt that the blockchain could be useful in certain circumstances, but was brittle, easily broken. So personally, the more I read about blockchain, the more I hear its promoters talking, the more I worry that here again we have another clever technical trick being tossed into an already strained and complex and contested environment. And I'm not sure that that has durability. It just seems to me to be a technical reach out into the future that may or may not succeed. Bits of it probably will be taken up, but as revolutionizing society and civilization, personally I very much doubt it.
Thank you. With this, we are going to have our break.
Yes.